While we were having dinner, my daughter-in-law suddenly said, "Your voice is annoying. Go eat in your room." So I did. I took my plate, went upstairs, and ate alone in silence while tears slowly streamed down my face. The following morning, I pulled the plug on the loan she'd been counting on for her business. "I'm thankful you're here. Stay with me through this whole story, and let me know what city you're watching from so I can see how far it travels." The humiliation? I'm Nancy, 69 years old. Last Tuesday night, my daughter-in-law said something that crushed the last shred of pride I had left. "Your voice is irritating. Go eat in your room." I was at my own dining table, the same table Frank and I bought over 4 decades ago when we moved into this house. It's where I served countless meals, helped Ryan with homework, and hosted birthdays and holidays. But that night, sitting beside my 34-year-old son and his wife Camille, I felt like a stranger who didn't belong. Ryan said nothing. He kept cutting into his steak, eyes fixed on his plate, like he always did whenever Camille decided to show me my place. The silence felt heavy and tight until I finally pushed my chair back. "Of course," I whispered, picking up my plate, with hands that shook more from heartache than age. I'll finish eating upstairs." Camille gave that smug, chilly smile she always had when she thought she'd won. "Thanks, Nancy. We just need some quiet time to talk business." Business. The irony wasn't lost on me, though she didn't know the half of it. I walked up to my room slowly, each stair-step weighing me down. The plate felt impossibly heavy. I could hear their hushed conversation behind me, probably about some vacation or her beauty brand that hadn't yet found the right investor. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I tried to force down the meatloaf I'd made with care, but it tasted like cardboard. First came a few tears, then full waves that made my shoulders shake. Camille had belittled me before, but this time felt like a line had been crossed, like something had broken. For the past 3 years, since Ryan married her, I'd been living on edge in my own home. She moved in 6 months after their wedding, saying they needed to save money and rest better. What she really wanted was control, and she took it by slowly turning Ryan against me, one subtle dig at a time. "Your mother hovers too much. She acts like you're still a kid. Nancy always has to be the center of attention, doesn't she?" She would say these things with a sweet, innocent look, like she was doing him a favor by being honest. At first, I'd try to explain myself, to stand up for who I was, to show I wasn't the meddling monster she made me out to be. But the more I defended myself, the worse it got. Ryan grew irritated. He'd ask why I couldn't just get along with his wife, why I made things difficult. Eventually, I gave up. I began apologizing instead for cooking his favorite meals without checking with Camille, for telling stories from his childhood, for just existing in a way that upset her. Frank would be heartbroken if he knew how I let them treat me. He never let anyone walk on him, but Frank never had to choose between his self-respect and the only child he had left when he passed away 8 years ago. Ryan became my everything. My world shrank to making sure he had what he needed to thrive. So when he brought Camille home, I was thankful he'd found someone. I would have accepted anyone who made him happy. I never imagined she'd see me as a rival. The worst part wasn't the snide comments or cold shoulders, it was feeling my bond with Ryan slip away. The son who used to call me regularly now barely spoke for 5 minutes. The boy who once asked for my guidance now brushed off my thoughts like they meant nothing. Sitting alone in my room while they chatted about their plans downstairs, I made up my mind. I was done being erased from my own life. What Camille didn't realize, what neither of them knew, was that I had far more influence than she thought. The next day, I called my lawyer, not because I was planning revenge, but because Frank always told me to keep our finances reviewed yearly. I'd been putting this off since he passed, partly because it still hurt, and partly because Frank had always been the numbers guy. As I sank into the leather chair across from David Kaplan, he said, "Mrs. Whitman, I'm glad you finally came in. There are some matters regarding the Montgomery Trust that require your attention." The Montgomery Trust? Frank had set it up long ago, named after his grandfather who had founded the family's construction company. I'd signed documents when he first created it, but truthfully, I never paid much attention to the specifics. Frank took care of the money, and I handled everything else. "What exactly needs my attention?" I asked, taking the thick folder David handed me. "Well, you're the sole trustee now, which means every investment decision goes through you. The trust's doing very well, Currently worth about $2.8 million. I nearly dropped the folder. I'm sorry, how much? David gave me a calm smile. $2.8 million. Your husband was incredibly smart with money. The trust has been bringing in serious returns, and per his instructions, those profits have been used to fund a few things. Let's call them family investments. My heart pounded faster. What kind of family investments? David opened another folder. Regular transfers to Luminous Beauty LLC. That's your daughter-in-law's business. If I'm not mistaken, the trust has provided around $180,000 in startup capital over the last year and a half, plus $15,000 per month in ongoing support. The room shifted under me. Camille's cosmetics company, the one she always bragged about building from scratch, the one she claimed investors didn't understand, was funded by my husband's money, money I now control. Does my son know about this? I asked, my throat tight. According to Frank's notes, the support was meant to stay anonymous. He believed the business should succeed on its own, without any sense of obligation. Frank had tried, even in death, to protect Ryan's pride and give Camille space to stand on her own. What he didn't see coming was how they'd treat the woman he left behind. What other investments are there? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. David scanned through his papers. Let's see, there's the mortgage support program that's been covering property, taxes and upkeep for this house, and the vacation place in Lake Tahoe, about $4,000 a month. Then there's the education fund, which paid for your son's MBA and is now covering his wife's business courses. Each new detail hit like a gut punch. Every comfort they had, every opportunity they seized, every win they celebrated, it was all built on Frank's work. And now, I was the one in charge. David, I said slowly, what happens if I want to shift these investments? He raised an eyebrow. That's completely up to you as trustee. You can move the money however you think is best, as long as it follows the trust's goals for charity and family support. And if I decide to stop funding some investments that aren't working, that's also your call. Though I'd suggest giving 30 days notice to keep things smooth. I stayed in that office for another hour, learning about account codes, portfolios, legal duties, things I never thought I'd need to know. Frank had quietly built something huge, and now it belonged to me. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the manipulative, sharp-edged kind Camille threw around, but the calm, steady kind that comes from realizing what you're worth. Ryan's car was in the driveway when I pulled in. Through the kitchen window, I saw him and Camille at the table, laptops open, papers everywhere, probably working on the next big plan for Luminous Beauty. If only they knew their whole operation was bankrolled by the woman they just told to eat dinner alone upstairs. I walked in, past their so-called strategy session, and headed up to my room. For the first time in years, I wasn't creeping through my own house. I was thinking ahead. That night, as I lay in bed and heard them downstairs toasting another tiny victory, I made up my mind. Frank had tried to help while keeping their pride intact, but Frank had never been told to leave his own dinner table. They needed to understand who they had dismissed. I waited a full week before I acted. That's how I've always done things. 7 days of Ryan nodding along, playing the agreeable husband, keeping the peace like it was the only thing that mattered. On Thursday morning, I got David Kaplan on the line again. I'd like to stop funding Luminous Beauty LLC, I told him, my voice calmer than I actually felt, effective immediately. Are you sure, Mrs. Whitman? This could put serious pressure on the company, I'm sure. I'd also like to end the monthly property support payments. I'll be covering those costs myself from now on. The reality was, between my Social Security and Frank's pension, I had more than enough to handle property taxes and upkeep. The trust was just cushioning for people who couldn't be bothered to treat me with basic decency. David completed the process over the phone. By lunchtime, all auto transfers were cut off. Luminous Beauty's safety net vanished, and they had no clue. I spent the rest of the day doing what I always did, cleaning, cooking, playing the quiet old lady they assumed I was. But inside, I felt a spark I hadn't felt since Frank passed. Friday showed the first cracks. Camille was pacing in the kitchen, phone in hand, her tone tight with frustration. What do you mean the investor pulled out? We had a deal. She walked back and forth near the window, one perfectly polished hand flailing. No, I don't get it. Everything was greenlit last month. I kept folding laundry at the kitchen table, as invisible as ever. She didn't even look my way while arguing with whoever was on the line. Find out what happened, she barked before hanging up. Then her eyes landed on me. Nancy, did you hear any of that? I looked up, wide-eyed. Sorry, dear. I was focused on getting these stains out of Ryan's shirts. Everything okay? She studied me for a beat, then shook her head. Just some business stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. Nothing for me to worry about. If only she knew. By Monday, panic had taken root. I kept hearing Camille making endless calls to banks, to backers, to anyone who might shed light on why the money had stopped flowing. She'd slam the phone down and stomp around, cursing financial advisors and flaky partners. Ryan came home that night looking worn out. Over dinner served at the dining room table. Though they didn't bother asking me to sit, I listened to them whispering across the plates. The bank says someone flagged our business accounts, Camille said, stabbing at her salad. They won't say who, but now everything's frozen while they investigate. Investigate what? Ryan asked. We haven't done anything wrong. I know, but someone raised flags about our funding. They're asking for backup for every deposit from the last 2 years. I nearly smiled. David had mentioned this might come up. When steady trust payments vanish overnight, banks notice, especially when those funds come from accounts with charitable tax perks. Maybe Mom knows something, Ryan said, out of nowhere. She's always been good with numbers. Camille let out a cold laugh. Your mom, Ryan. She can barely use an ATM. What would she possibly know about business financing? From the kitchen doorway, I watched my son's face sink. Even he was beginning to realize how little his wife thought of us, of me. I just figured maybe she'd have a thought or two, he said, voice low. The only thought your mom ever has is how to make everything revolve around her, Camille snapped. Like last week, when she tried to take over our business dinner. Thank God I sent her upstairs before she ruined the whole night in front of serious people. People who mattered. She was recounting that night. She humiliated me. But in her version, I was the issue. I was the one causing shame. Ryan didn't push back, but I noticed him glance toward the kitchen. And maybe, just maybe, there was some guilt in that look. That night, I lay in bed listening to their argument. The walls weren't thick enough to keep their voices from reaching me. They grew louder as tension built. This doesn't add up, Ryan kept repeating. Money doesn't vanish into thin air. Someone has to know something. Well, it sure wasn't your beloved mother, Camille snapped. She can hardly manage a checkbook, let alone mess with investments. Can hardly manage a checkbook. The same woman who'd been quietly financing their lifestyle for 2 full years apparently couldn't handle basic math. I pulled Frank's pillow in tight and grinned into the dark. They thought I was weak, invisible, unnecessary. They were clueless that they'd been living off the woman they dismissed as deadweight. But soon they'd get the message. Every comfort they thought was theirs by default. Every chance they assumed was guaranteed. Every dollar they spent like it grew on trees. All of it came from the very woman they treated like a fool. The woman they told to eat in her room like some misbehaving child. Tomorrow, I decided, they'd finally have something real to stress about. 2 weeks after I stopped supporting them, I saw my daughter-in-law shift from poised and polished to frantic and worn down. That glossy mask she wore for 3 years started slipping, and underneath wasn't anything nice. It began with little moments. Camille snapping at the cashier when her credit card didn't go through, her tone turning shrill during client calls, the way she'd fix her gaze on me at dinner, like trying to decode some secret in my face. Your mother's been acting weird, she told Ryan one night while I made their coffee. They were in the living room, but this old house didn't keep secrets. Haven't you noticed? Ryan exhaled. Weird how? I don't know. Different. Like she's observing us. Mom's always been sharp. Dad used to say she missed nothing. This is different. Ryan. Yesterday, I saw her checking the mail before I could get it, and she keeps asking offbeat things about my meetings. I hadn't touched their mail or asked anything strange, but paranoia was sinking its claws into Camille. The truth was much simpler. I'd stopped shrinking when she raised her voice. I quit apologizing for simply existing in my own home. When you've been treated like a ghost for years, even the tiniest shift feels huge. But Camille wasn't wrong. I had changed. For the first time since Frank passed, I had something more to live for than just making it to bedtime. The real chaos hit in week 3 without money. Camille was scrambling for backers, but serious investors don't throw money around without asking tough questions, like where did your startup money come from? Can we speak to your past supporters? Questions she couldn't answer, because she never knew it all came from Frank's trust. I was doing dishes when I overheard her talking to someone she hoped could rescue the company. I understand you need documentation, she was saying, trying to sound pleasant while barely holding it together. But our past investor wanted to stay anonymous. It was all arranged through middlemen. A pause, then, no, I don't have any contact info for them. Everything was done through family ties. She paused again, this time, for much longer. When she finally spoke, that sugary tone in her voice had vanished completely. What do you mean that sounds irregular? This is a legitimate business with actual products and real customers. The call ended on a sour note. I could tell by the way she slammed the receiver down and instantly punched in another number. That night, she pulled Ryan aside in their bedroom. I was in the hall bathroom, but the thin walls made their conversation hard to miss. We need to ask your mother for a loan, Camille said. A loan? Mom doesn't have that kind of money. How would you know? She's lived in this house for 40 years. Your dad worked in construction management. They had to have savings. Camille, Mom's living off Social Security and Dad's pension. She cuts coupons, shops secondhand. Then let's ask her to co-sign on a business loan. Banks have confidence in senior homeowners. I clutched the bathroom sink as a cold anger settled in my chest. After years of being treated like a nuisance in my own home, after being told my voice was annoying, after being quietly humiliated and pushed aside, now they wanted to exploit my credit, my name, my house, to prop up their sinking company, the one they'd been running on my dime all along. I'm not sure, Ryan said. Mom's been through a lot since Dad passed. I don't want to overwhelm her with business stuff. Overwhelm her? Ryan, this is about our future, our life together. If Luminous Beauty folds, we lose everything. Maybe we should move out, get a place of our own, ease things up for Mom, and cut back on costs. Move out, Camille's voice pitched high, almost a scream. This house is ideal for entertaining clients. The address alone opens doors for us. And your mother loves having us here. We're doing her a favor by keeping her company. A favor. Living rent-free in my home. Eating my groceries. Excluding me from my own table. All generous favors to poor, lonely me. I left the bathroom and headed to my bedroom quietly, but I could still hear Camille laying it on thick, breaking down Ryan's resistance like she always did. She owes us at least this much, Camille insisted. After all we've sacrificed to care for her. Do you have any idea how many events I've skipped because I couldn't leave her alone? How many business dinners we've hosted here instead of going out just so someone could watch her? Each lie cut like a blade, but I'd grown numb to the hurt. What got to me now was how easily Ryan had started buying into her warped version of reality, the one where they were my selfless caregivers, giving up their freedom to look after a frail old woman. By morning, she had him fully convinced. He knocked on my door while I was getting dressed, something he hadn't done in months. Mom, can we talk? I opened it to see him standing there, sheepish, the way he looked as a kid when he broke something he shouldn't have touched. Sure, honey, what's going on? It's about Camille's business. They're in a tough spot and we were thinking, maybe you could help out. Help in what way? Well, if you could co-sign for a small loan, just temporarily, till they stabilized. I looked into my son's eyes and saw the same child who used to gift me dandelions and call them flowers now asking me to gamble my house on a company I'd already been bankrolling in secret for 2 years. How much are we talking? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Maybe 50 grand. 60 at most. Such a small figure compared to what I'd already put in, but they didn't know that, and their ignorance gave me the upper hand. Let me think about it, I said. This is a big decision. Ryan's face lit up with hope. Really? You'll think about it. I'll think about it. But what I was actually considering was just how hard I was going to let them fall before I decided whether or not to catch them. I told them I needed a week. What I truly needed was time to gather what I knew would change everything. Wednesday morning, with Ryan at work and Camille off at what she claimed was a crucial client meeting, I drove downtown to a small cafe where I'd planned to meet someone who'd been quietly observing my family's mess with growing alarm. Linda Kaplan, David's wife, had served as Frank's assistant for 15 years before his retirement. She'd played a big role in creating the Montgomery Trust and stayed in touch with me after he passed, checking in from time to time to see how I was doing. Nancy, she said as she slid into the booth across from me, you look better than you have in months. I feel better, I admitted, though I'm not sure that will last. Linda had called 2 days earlier with something she believed I needed to know, something about Camille that suddenly made the past 3 years make more sense. Tell me what you found, I said, clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline. Linda pulled a folder from her bag, glanced around to make sure we were alone, then leaned in. I wasn't sure about sharing this, but after what you told me about how they've been treating you, she said, opening the folder to show me printed emails, financial records, and what looked like legal filings. Camille wasn't completely upfront about her past when she married Ryan, Linda said cautiously. This isn't her first time being married. My stomach turned. What do you mean? She used to be married to a man named Peter Whitaker. His family ran a chain of car dealerships in Connecticut. That marriage lasted 2 years. Linda handed me a newspaper article from Connecticut, dated 4 years back. The headline read, "Local businessman granted restraining order against ex." According to the court files, Camille had moved in with Peter's elderly mom shortly after their wedding. Within 6 months, she convinced Peter that his mother was showing signs of dementia and should be moved into a care home. She then took over the finances and started cutting the older woman off from loved ones. The warmth of the coffee shop did nothing to stop the chill I felt. What happened? Peter's mom tried to alert him, but Camille had a way of twisting things to make her sound like a confused senior. Peter didn't start digging until he noticed $50,000 had gone missing from his mom's account and ended up funding one of Camille's businesses. Linda flipped the page to show me the transaction records. Camille had been draining the account bit by bit, all while telling Peter the funds were being used for his mom's care. When he brought it up, she said the mother had given her consent, was thankful for her help, and wanted to back her business goals. The resemblance to my current life was unnerving. Did Peter buy her story? At first, but later, his mother had a clear-headed moment in front of others and stated outright she never approved any transfers. Camille had been faking her signature the whole time. I stared at the documents, feeling like I was seeing my own fate laid out in someone else's heartbreak. What happened to his mother? She passed away 6 months later, heart failure made worse by the stress. Peter still carries guilt for not listening sooner. Linda's voice softened but stayed steady. He told me he'd give anything to stop Camille from doing this again. Patton. Peter looked into her past after they split. Camille has a track record of finding men with aging moms or sick family members. She acts like the perfect caretaker, moves in, gains control, and then slowly cuts off the vulnerable from those around them. I remembered how quickly Camille had moved into our home after marrying Ryan, how she began pushing the idea that I was becoming a problem, that what I thought didn't count, that I was just an old woman who needed to be managed, not heard. There's more, Linda said in a low voice. Camille is cheating. The words hit like a punch. With who? A guy named Brandon Cole. He's a business advisor she brought in half a year ago. They've been meeting at the downtown Marriott every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Linda handed me hotel invoices, credit card details, even pictures taken by the investigator Peter had hired to watch his ex. She's been using business funds, your money, really, to cover these hotel meets. The consulting fees she pays him, they're triple the usual rate, and their sessions mostly happen in hotel rooms, not offices. I looked at the evidence, feeling a sharp mix of fury and clarity. Furious at the lies, relieved to finally see what I was up against. The investigator chose us as her next victims. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because Peter wanted you to know, he said. He's watched her ruin 3 families now, and he won't sit by and let it happen again. He's ready to speak out if you need him. I gathered the documents, my hands calm. What does he think I should do? He believes you need to act fast, protect yourself and your son before she does more damage. But also, Linda paused. He thinks Camille slipped this time. She's used to preying on the confused and the passive. She doesn't know what to do when someone smart and prepared fights back. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like I'd just been handed a secret weapon I never knew I needed. But I also realized that simply having information wasn't the same as knowing what to do with it. That night, I sat on my bed and dialed Ryan's cell. Mom, is everything okay? You never call my cell. I need you to come home early tomorrow. There's something important we need to talk about regarding the loan. Of course, should Camille be there too? I glanced at the folder of documents sitting beside my lamp. Actually, I'd rather talk to you first, just to make sure I've got everything straight. Sure, Mom. Whatever you need. What I needed was for my son to finally see who he married. And the next day, I was going to make sure he did. Ryan walked in early Thursday afternoon, finding me in the kitchen baking his favorite cookies. For a second, he looked like the little boy who'd rush home from school with stories to tell. "Something smells amazing," he said, sliding into his usual seat at the table. "You didn't have to go all out just to talk. It's no trouble. We've got a serious conversation ahead, and cookies help with that." I handed him a glass of milk and set the warm cookies on the table, just like I used to when we had tough talks. "Mom, about the loan," he began, but I raised my hand. "Before we talk loans, there are things you need to know about Camille, about your marriage, about what's really been going on around here." I opened the folder Linda had given me and slid the first paper across to him. Ryan's face lost all color when he read the headline about Peter Whitaker's restraining order. "Mom, where did this come from?" "From someone who cares about our family. Someone who's seen Camille destroy others and couldn't stay quiet anymore." I laid it all out for him. Her first marriage, how she targeted aging relatives, the way she cut people off and siphoned their finances. With every document, I watched Ryan's expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something close to fear. "This can't be true," he murmured, staring at hotel receipts. "Camille wouldn't. She loves me, doesn't she? When's the last time she stood up for you? The last time she put your needs ahead of her own?" Ryan sat silent, fingers in his hair like he used to do when he couldn't figure out a math problem. "But the business meetings," he asked, "Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the Marriott, not business affairs. Camille's been using company funds, your dad's trust fund money, to book rooms for her and another man." "Trust fund?" Brian's head snapped up. "What trust fund?" I steadied myself. "Frank created the Montgomery Trust before he passed. For 2 years, it's been fueling Camille's business. She thought the money came from anonymous investors, but it was all from your father's legacy. And now it's under my name." Ryan looked at me like I'd told him I was in the CIA. "You've been funding Luminous Beauty, not on purpose. Not at first. Your dad wanted you both to have a shot, but also to grow on your own. He never thought the people benefiting from his kindness would treat his wife like an afterthought." I showed Ryan the statements, the legal paperwork, every receipt proving that their comfort came from Frank. And it had all stopped the day Camille told me to eat alone in my room. That funding crisis they're freaking out about. That's because I stopped the payments. I was done paying to be disrespected in my own house. Ryan's hands trembled as he set the papers aside. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear, I never knew any of this. I believe you. But you did know how she treated me, and you let it happen. Over and over. You chose her peace over my self-worth." And right then, we heard Camille pull into the driveway. Ryan looked shaken. "What am I supposed to do? How do I even look at her after all this?" "You don't need to act just yet, just observe. Watch how she acts when she thinks she's calling the shots." Camille stormed through the front door, her voice echoing down the hall. "Ryan, are you here? I've got the best news." She popped into the kitchen doorway, practically buzzing with energy. "Brandon found us new investors. Well, one major investor ready to fund the whole expansion. We're signing contracts with him tomorrow." I watched Ryan's face as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. Brandon, the guy she was cheating with, now supposedly bringing in big money for the business, the same business that had secretly been funded already without her knowledge. "That's great," Ryan replied carefully. "Who's the investor?" "Someone Brandon's worked with before. Very private, very exclusive. Wants to stay anonymous, but he's offering 200 grand. 200 grand. More than the trust had given them over 2 years. I couldn't help wondering where this mystery cash was really coming from and what Camille had offered in return. "We'll finally be able to expand like we planned," Camille added, then noticed me at the table. Her face instantly changed. "Nancy, have you decided about co-signing that loan? If this other investor comes through, we might not need it." "Actually," I replied evenly, "I've decided I won't be co-signing anything." Camille's excitement faded. "Why not?" "Because I don't think your business is built to last." "What do you even know about business?" Camille shot back. Her polished act completely fell away. "You've never worked a corporate job a day in your life. You don't have a clue about running a company." Ryan cleared his throat. "Actually, Camille, Mom's been more involved than you think." The edge in his voice made Camille pause. "What are you talking about?" "Tell her, Mom," Ryan said quietly. Tell her where the money really came from. I rose slowly, watching Camille's confidence begin to collapse. The Montgomery Trust has been backing Luminous Beauty since day one. Every so-called anonymous investor, every unexplained deposit, every dollar you assumed came from outside. It came from my late husband's estate. Funds I manage. Camille went pale. That's not true, isn't it? Didn't it ever seem odd that all those investors vanished once the money dried up, that no one could provide contact info for them? I pulled out another folder, filled with copies of each transaction, every single payment made from the trust to her company. 2 years, Camille. 2 years of building your empire with my money while treating me like I didn't matter. Sleeping with Brandon and using my money for your hotel trysts. Camille opened and closed her mouth, speechless. Then she turned to Ryan. You don't seriously believe this, right? She's just bitter and jealous of what we've built. But Ryan was already on his feet, holding hotel receipts in his hand. Is this part of her imagination too? These Marriott charges, business account expenses, labeled as consulting, lining up with your Tuesday and Thursday vanishing acts. Camille deflated instantly. She slumped against the doorway, and for the first time ever, she looked worn down by her own lies. I want you gone, Ryan said softly. Pack your bags and go. Tonight. Camille made one last attempt, an explanation, an excuse, a plea. But it was too late. The proof was there, and Ryan finally saw her for who she was. That night, she left with 2 suitcases and her car. No outbursts, no last words, just a quiet end from someone whose scheme had come undone. Afterward, Ryan and I sat again in the kitchen. The house felt bigger, lighter, without her energy hanging over it. Mom, he said, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. You don't need to say sorry, sweetheart. You were caught in the web of someone who knew exactly how to twist things, but I should have caught it sooner. I should have been the one to shield you. I reached out and held his hand. You were just trying to keep your marriage together. That's what a good husband tries to do. You didn't realize she wasn't worth that kind of loyalty. 3 months later, Ryan was back living in his old bedroom, figuring out the divorce and what came next. It wasn't the future either of us pictured, but it was more real than anything we'd had in years. I still had the Montgomery Trust, but I used it differently now, with more thoughts. Frank's money started going toward things that actually mattered: scholarships for students, aid for elderly folks who've been taken advantage of, and a future that gave my son a second chance. Camille vanished from our world completely. Linda mentioned she'd moved down to Florida and had her sights set on another family. I thought about saying something, but I knew better now. Some lessons folks just have to learn on their own. In the evenings, Ryan and I would cook dinner together and sit down at the table, talking like we used to before everything got complicated. My voice wasn't annoying anymore. My company wasn't something to brush aside. I'd reclaimed my strength, and more than that, I'd reclaimed my voice, right there in my own kitchen. At my own table, with the son who finally saw me again as more than a hurdle in his path. The empire Frank left behind was still under my care, but I ruled it differently now. I hadn't realized how long I'd been waiting for this peaceful silence, until I found myself alone in the kitchen one ordinary morning, making coffee just for me, with the radio playing softly in the background and the light from the window casting shadows on the countertop. There were no voices demanding anything, no whispers, no footsteps monitoring my movements, just me, the aroma of coffee, and a silence that didn't hurt, that didn't crush me. It was a kind silence. I had reclaimed my home. Darren had moved into his old bedroom, the one that still had some pictures from his teenage years on the walls and a football jersey hanging on the closet door. I watched him quietly when he fell asleep on the couch watching documentaries, or when he helped me wash the dishes without saying a word, as if he didn't want to disturb the calm we were slowly rebuilding. We spoke more through gestures than words. He carried a guilt I couldn't take away from him, but I didn't force him to name it either. He would need time. So would I. One morning, while watering the plants in my little backyard, I felt something I didn't recognize at first, a jolt of emotion, a tingling in my chest. It was hope. For years I had convinced myself that the only thing I could do was survive, adapt, shrink myself to fit into the spaces Lennox allowed me. But now I could stretch out, take up every corner of my home, breathe deeply without fearing I'd be a bother. And if I could do that, what else could I do? That's when I started writing a list in my blue notebook, the one I used for recipes. Only this time, I didn't write recipes, I wrote down wishes, things I had always wanted to do but never allowed myself. Sing in a choir, take pottery classes, learn to swim. Travel alone, adopt an old dog from a shelter. I opened the page timidly, as if I were spying on myself. But I didn't stop. Page after page, I filled it with simple, small, but powerful dreams. The first thing on the list was, take pottery classes. And I did. I called the local cultural center and signed up for a Tuesday afternoon workshop. I remember my first day there like it was yesterday. My hands were trembling, the cold clay between my fingers, the scent of damp earth. I felt clumsy, old, ridiculous. But then, in the middle of a failed attempt to make a bowl, I started to laugh. A real laugh, the kind that shakes your whole body. I was covered in clay up to my elbows, and I didn't care. No one was judging me. In that workshop, I met Clara, a widow with a raspy voice and a loud laugh who took me in like a sister. There was also Felipe, a thin, older man with a white beard who made bird figurines because they reminded him of his late wife. Every Tuesday, after shaping our wobbly creations, we'd sit in the town square and drink hot chocolate. We didn't talk much about the past. We talked about the clay, the weather, old movies, and sometimes little things that hurt, but always between laughs. A few months later, I adopted Tito, a graying schnauzer who was half blind and unwanted. I saw him on the animal shelter's website and knew he was mine. When he came home, he sniffed every corner like he recognized the place. He curled up at my feet that first night and has been my shadow ever since. Walking him around the neighborhood became another way of reclaiming my space. People greeted me, children petted him, and some neighbors called me Tito's lady. I never minded. It was better than being invisible. Darren watched all these changes in silence. One night, he said, "I didn't know you had such a zest for life, Mom." I looked at him tenderly. I didn't know either. He didn't ask for explanations. He just nodded. He was changing too, slowly letting go of the version of himself Lennox had shaped. He had started drawing again, his passion from university. Sometimes I'd find him in the backyard, sketching Tito while he napped in the sun. One day, I proposed something I'd been thinking about for weeks. A trip, not to a faraway or expensive place, just to the cabin in Valle de Bravo, the one Ernesto had bought so excitedly but that we'd stopped visiting after his death. Darren hesitated but agreed. We packed a few things, loaded Tito in the car, and drove for hours, with 70s music playing softly, and the wind blowing through the windows. Arriving there felt like opening a chest that had been locked for years. Everything was dusty, but the memories were still there. The board games in winter, the walks to the lake, the laughter by the fireplace. That night, while we looked at the stars from the terrace, Darren said, "Dad would be proud of you." I felt a lump in my throat. "You think so?" "Yes. I've never seen you more yourself." He took my hand and, for a moment, we weren't a mother and son carrying woundset. We're two people who had weathered a storm and were finally able to breathe. I decided I would no longer settle for mere survival. I wanted to live with intention. So when we returned, I spoke with Roberto and Margarita and proposed a new use for a part of the trust fund, a support program for older women who had suffered financial or emotional abuse within their families. We called it Manos Lieb. Margarita helped with the legal side. Clara, my pottery friend, designed the logo. Philippe created a sculpture for the community center. Each week, women like me gather in a warm room with lavender-colored walls. We share stories, we laugh, we cry, we learn to say no without guilt. Some are just coming out of the tunnel. Others, like me, are already on the other side. But all of us have one thing in common. We survived, and now we live. At the entrance of the center, there's a plaque that reads, "Here, no one is invisible." And every time I see it, I know that phrase belongs to me too. After launching the Manos Libres program, something inside me opened like an old door that had been shut for far too long. It was no longer just about healing what I had lived through, but about walking toward everything I had always postponed. Not to make up for lost years, but to embrace those I still had ahead. And so, one Tuesday morning, without telling anyone, I bought a train ticket to Oaxaca. I had never traveled alone. Harold was always the one who planned everything, picked the hotels, made the reservations. I just packed and followed. But this time, every decision was mine. The destination, the itinerary, the pace. I stayed in a simple inn with adobe walls, a courtyard full of potted plants, and homemade breakfast served with a warm smile that reminded me of my mother. I walked along cobblestone streets, visited markets where the ladies offered me met as if we were old friends, and sat for hours in Plaza Santo Domingo watching life go by. I bought a cobalt blue rebozo that I still wear on chilly mornings. No one asked me what I was doing alone. No one looked at me with pity. I was just another woman traveling, living, discovering. One afternoon, in a handmade paper workshop, I met Rosario. She was 72, wore gray braids tied with red ribbons, and taught me how to make paper with bougainvillea petals. She said, "Ramona, you're not starting over. You're starting for the first time." Those words stayed with me. I returned from Oaxaca with a recycled paper notebook and a promise to write my story. Every afternoon, I sat at the dining table, my table with a cup of tea, and wrote, sometimes just 1 page, sometimes 10, not to publish, not out of vanity, but out of dignity. I needed to name what I had lived, to give shape to the silence, to remember that every wound had its origin, but also its cure. I read what I wrote at the Manos Libres meetings, and many women saw themselves in my words. One of them hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you for saying what I haven't been able to put into words." I told Darren about the trip weeks after I returned. He was surprised, of course, but not in a bad way. He said, "It's strange to picture you walking through Mexico on your own, but it's also beautiful." He was changing too. He had moved into a small apartment near downtown, resumed his work as a graphic designer, and started dating someone. I knew because one evening he came home more dressed up than usual. I didn't ask much. I just said, "Take care of her, and take care of yourself." Tito and I continued our routines with joy. On Sundays, we went to the park, and the kids already knew his name. Some older neighbors joined me on weekly walks, and we called them freedom strolls. We didn't talk much, but we walked as if each step was a reminder that we were still here, alive, strong. One day, I received a certified letter from Florida. The sender's name was Lennox Hartwell. It took me 2 days to open it. It was a short note, handwritten. "Ramona, I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you, I've been in therapy. I know I caused a lot of harm. I hope you find peace. I'm trying to find mine." I didn't reply. I didn't feel anger, nor relief. Just a kind of quiet closure. A door that finally closed without needing to slam. Lennox had been a dark chapter, but she no longer dictated my story. She didn't deserve space in my present anymore. Over time, Manos Libres grew. We received support from a local foundation and opened a second center in the northern part of the city. Margaret became the main coordinator. I, on the other hand, took on a more symbolic role, giving talks, organizing reading circles, and accompanying new members during their first weeks. I didn't like calling myself a leader. I preferred to say I was a witness. A witness that yes, it's possible. During one of those talks, a 30-year-old woman said to me, "I don't know if I can wait until I'm 69 to be free." I answered, "You don't have to wait. You just have to decide that you deserve something better. Time will take care of the rest," she cried. And so did I. I went back to writing in my blue notebook, but this time, they weren't dreams to be fulfilled. They were moments lived, singing in the church choir without fear of singing off-key, eating chocolate cake without thinking about the calories, sleeping with Tito curled up beside me during a storm and not feeling afraid, laughing until I cried in a laughter therapy workshop, saying no without explanations, saying yes only when I truly meant it, and one I crossed off with satisfaction, reclaiming my voice. One Thursday night, while cooking chili en nogada, just for myself, because yes, I now treat myself, even if there's no one else at the table, I thought of Harold, not with sadness, but with gratitude. He left me a legacy, yes, but beyond the trust fund, he left me with the confidence that I was capable. It just took me years to realize it. Now, every time I walk through my house, I feel it belongs to me, not just because of legal documents, but because of presence. Every corner holds something of mine, a plant, a favorite mug, a gentle memory. And if the day ever comes when I have to leave this house, I know it won't be out of obligation. It will be because I choose to. Because my home, I now understand, is me. My name is Ramona. I'm 68 years old. And this is my story. But more importantly, this is my life. And for the first time, I'm living it with all my heart. We share this story based on real events, The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of the person involved. It's the story of a mother who sacrificed her entire life for her children and grandchildren, only to be scorned, used, and abandoned in the end. But when she had nothing left to lose, she rose up, and this time, she lived for herself. We don't tell this story to judge, but to invite those who listen to pause and reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? Now, I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever experienced something similar? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'm leaving 2 more stories on the final screen that are channel favorites and they'll definitely surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.